Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 821. We interview Kevin Miller.
From the sleepy suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, there are assembled the world's two greatest podcast hosts, created from the cosmic legends of the universe. Sean Whalen.
Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast. I'm a big fan of variant colors. My love for Batman is that stuff. Let's talk some comics.
And Jim Segulin.
How's it going, eh? You know me and Superman. I'm really loving what they're doing. Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast.
Their mission, to discuss DC Comics in books, movies, and television several times a month in 1 to 3 hour episodes. And to serve all mankind.
Outstanding!
Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, Dr. Norge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Jim, the sensei of the whatnot, Segulin.
How's it going, eh?
Jim, on this episode, we had a great opportunity to talk to author Kevin Miller about his upcoming work, The Crisis Companion, published by TwoMorrows Publishing. We also get a chance to talk to him about the Comic Locker, and there's a great contest available for our listening audience all around Crisis and this great collecting app. So we are proud to have him a part of the show, and we are sponsored as always by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. Mr. Segulin, what is going on over at DCB Service.com?
We have Dark Knights of Steel, number 2. It's a issue 1 of 12, 38% off, only $3.71. And we have Dark Knights of Steel, Heir to the Sea, one shot, 38% off, only $3.71. And of course, both of these are written by Tom Taylor, so they're must reads.
I love Dark Knights of Steel. I just love the whole universe and everything, so I'm glad that we're getting more of that. Over at InStockTrades.com, we have a lot of the DC books are in the top sellers. I'm just going to grab some highlights. A lot of DC's Finest. We got DC Finest Dead Man, How Many Times Can a Guy Die? DC Finest Batman, A Death in the Family. And we also have Wonder Woman, Dawn Before Darkness trade paperback. These are all $39.99 regularly, 42% off, only $23.19. They also have Zatanna by Paul Dini, the omnibus hardcover. This is $100 regularly, 40% off, only $60. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. And I also want to do a quick shout out to TwoMorrows.com, where you can find the Crisis Companion and you can pre-order it, either in a softcover or digital, depending on your preference. So please check that book out and listen to our interview to see why you should be picking up this book. Also want to shout out thecomiclocker.com. And we have a special, thecomiclocker.com/Raging Bullets to get $10 off a pro subscription. So I want to thank Kevin Miller for providing that opportunity. Please listen to the interview for some potential trivia questions where you can earn a 1-year subscription to the Comic Locker, the pro version. So I want to thank Kevin also for donating those to the show as well. Mr. Segulin, this is an interesting one because we aren't really going super spoilery on this one, so I'm not sure how you want to handle this. What kind of podcast are we normally, or how do you want to do this today?
Well, Raging Bullets is normally a spoiler podcast, but we did a really good job not spoiling it. We had a brilliant discussion with a really cool guy. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Let's talk with Kevin. Very excited to have joining us today author Kevin Miller. Kevin has an upcoming work called The Crisis Companion from TwoMorrows Publishing, From Flash of Two Worlds to Infinite Crisis and Beyond. It's a 256-page softcover. And Kevin, thank you very much for joining us on Raging Bullets.
Oh, I'm super excited to be here.
So let's jump right into it. Crisis on Infinite Earths, very, very big series. What inspired you to create a volume unpacking the history of Crisis on Infinite Earths? Like, what started the genesis of this?
Well, for me, Crisis was kind of my intro to serious, quote unquote, fandom. It came out when I was 14 years old, and I was just, comics were always kind of a part of my life growing up, but I had kind of been mentored into collecting by one of my teachers. And so Crisis was one of the first books that he actually bought for me and said, hey, you should read this. And And, to be honest, I didn't even know that DC had a multiverse prior to reading Crisis, but that almost maybe made Crisis better because it was just this discovery of, wait a second, I've just sort of been dipping in and out of the pool, reading random issues here, there, and everywhere, but there's like a whole overarching, history and just this incredible depth to the storytelling that's been going on for decades, and I wasn't aware of it. So it really was the thing that made me want to go deeper. Some people say Crisis is like the worst thing you can hand somebody as an onboarding series, to get into the DCU. But for me, it was exactly the opposite. It was because there were so many things and so many characters that I'd never encountered before. It was really the beginning point to go off on all kinds of deep dives in different directions.
To your point, I grew up loving the JLA, JSA crossovers. I got into the early Perez stuff where Darkseid was brought in and you got to see this everything just felt big in scope and scale. I didn't know all the characters and it was an overwhelming amount, but I loved that. Why were there multiple Flashes? Why were there this and all that? And it's stuff you discover along the way that I think is fun. So you talk about in the book, the prehistory foundations of Crisis, the Flash of Two Worlds story, the multiverse and all of that. Why did you feel it was important to start there? I think it's obvious, but I'd love to hear it from you. Like
Well, it was important for me to start there. I think because Crisis just doesn't come out of nowhere. It's emerging from decades of history. So if we go back to Flash of Two Worlds in the Flash number 123, that's often seen as the official introduction of the multiverse into DC Comics. Now, anybody who's read any comics before that knows that the multiverse was alive and well. Even going back to say like Wonder Woman number 59, that's where you actually get the first image of two Earths, two parallel Earths, and that's where Wonder Woman meets a parallel version of herself. But really, these and she wasn't the only one. She did it multiple times. Batman, all kinds of characters made different journeys into different worlds, but it wasn't really a formalized thing. It was always more of a one-off thing that happened in a story and almost was really just forgotten about afterwards. An interesting thing about that Wonder Woman story, by the way, is she loses her lasso in that story, and she's given the lasso by the other Wonder Woman. So all the rest of her history on that Earth is she's actually using someone else's lasso, but that's never, I don't think I've ever seen that addressed in a story. So I think, so for me to be able to write about Crisis, I wanted to read my way forward. So what I actually did was in the research process, I didn't actually read Crisis till probably, of course I read Crisis multiple times, but it'd been a while, but I actually put off reading it for about 6 months. What I did was I read my way forward. I went back, I made a catalog of every parallel Earth story that I could get my hands on in DC, and I read them chronologically because I wanted to really see this kind of gradual evolution of the multiverse and the problems that started to create that eventually led Wolfman to say, okay, enough is enough. Like we need to clean this up because, the interesting thing about DC's multiverse is it was never really the product of somebody's grand scheme. Even the Flash of Two Worlds, it was really, Julie Schwartz was not into continuity. He was just doing a little bit of fan service to say, hey, how can we bring back the Golden Age Flash, and how can we find a logical way for the two of them to coexist? And came up with a great little idea, him and everyone else involved in that issue. And I'm not even sure if they had any idea what people like Grant Morrison would eventually do with that, because I think even then it's almost like a one-off thing. But the logic that Barry Allen sits down and explains to Jay and his wife, in terms of these parallel worlds vibrating at different frequencies and that sort of thing, this really becomes the logical underpinning of the multiverse. And so I just wanted to, like I said, read my way forward to kind of see this opportunity that ultimately became a problem, and then why was Crisis proposed as a solution. So then when I come into Crisis, then to read it again, so different than my experience as my 14-year-old self, because now there's just, I'm no longer just looking at the tip of the iceberg. I'm kind of climbing the iceberg on my way to the top.
The thing I love about this, and it's something you mentioned in the, you sent us the first initial pages of this, and you mentioned the fact that you didn't consider yourself a Crisis expert going into this. And I love the fresh lens into this. Like even the Wonder Woman story that you referenced, I consider myself a DC fan, lifelong DC fan. I didn't know that. And I love books like this because of the fact that there's always while it's great to see not only the stories that I love through a fresh lens, what have I also missed along the way? It's always great to learn something new. You had some really cool opportunities to interview people along the way and gather archival information. Who are some of the cool people that you got a chance to talk to, and what did that journey look like?
Yeah, well, I initially, one of the first people I talked to was Marv Wolfman. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk to him. We ended up having more of an extended email exchange. And I initially had sought out him and George Perez to do a documentary. This was years ago. Because I work in documentary film, and I worked on a lot of films that were about some pretty serious subject matter, and I just kind of was tired of every time a film came out, I had to sort of end up in a slugfest just trying to talk about the issue. So I just wanted to do something fun. And so I wanted to do something about Crisis. So I had actually reached out to Marv and George, who both had agreed to participate. But if sadly, George had passed away in the interim. So I went back to Marv and started talking to him. But, in terms of some of my more, face-to-face, at least through the internet, Paul Levitz was just so interesting to talk to. I was kind of scared to talk to him. He was the one that actually pushed me to really get my ducks in a row. First approached him, I didn't have a publisher yet. And he's like, well, do you have a publisher? I said, well, no, but I'm going to get one. And it would really help if I could say that I was interviewing you. And he says, well, come back to me when you have a publisher. And so that's what prompted me to go to TwoMorrows. Oh, cool. And then his next question is, are you a historian? Have you ever written any history before? And I'm like, well, no, but I can learn. So he's a very smart guy and really kept me on my toes. But what a fascinating person in terms of what he was able to experience. And so to get his perspective was great. Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, probably Jerry Ordway was one of my favorite interviews. It just lasted for hours, and he was in his studio and just showing me all kinds of stuff. And Bob Greenberger as well, because he was really had such a unique perspective on Crisis as well, because he'd really just been brought on board in DC, and he's like put into the deep end, working on Who's Who and Crisis, working with some DC's top creators and having to get them to do things and to kind of go toe the party line. And here's this young guy interfering with all their publishing plans. So yeah, just getting his perspective, and also really doing something unprecedented in terms of the crossovers and everything. And that's something I think that a lot of people find so charming about Crisis, is that this happened before the big publishers really knew how to do this right in terms of extracting as much money as possible from the fan base. And so there was kind of an innocence to it in terms of this really, the way I talk about it in the book, I say it was really a crisis of necessity for DC. Like, I think DC was in a precarious place in the market, but it was also a chance to take big swings. And Jeanette Kahn, I think, was like the perfect person to be in charge of DC at the time, just really encouraging everybody involved to say, hey, you're not thinking big enough. I want you to really go for it and make this epic. And so, I really think a love of the medium, a lifelong love on the part of Wolfman and Perez and everyone else involved was what really propelled this, as far apart from some kind of a commercial motive, even though, commercial necessity is always there, right? Because this is a for-profit enterprise.
It was what you mentioned, that DC was kind of in some dire straits at various points in time. I remember I read somewhere that there was a point in time where they were considering canceling things like Detective Comics and stuff like that along the way, which blows my mind when you consider the icon that Batman is, what that was like. But just showing that the roller coaster ride that this long journey that DC's been on has been, it's interesting to see that they would have had to have those conversations. A lot of stuff that we as fans, when you're just enjoying the comic books growing up, don't realize. I was a child of the 70s, so reading a lot of 70s DC comics, oblivious to the fact that there might be some trouble going on during that time for the company.
Yes, definitely. And that whole DC Marvel rivalry and there's such so many interesting books written about, what was going on behind the scenes in terms of editorial, and you have this young upstart Marvel just really putting the boots to DC in a lot of ways, because they're really reactive to the fans, whereas DC was slower because you have a lot of people who've been in this business, since the 40s, and they're not necessarily responding to those same triggers. So to look at, it was so fun to read about some of these editorial meetings where the DC brain trust would be looking at these Marvel comics that are outselling them, and they're trying to figure out, why are they outselling? Is it the colors on the cover? Is it the letters? Is it the words? And Stan Lee is kind of chuckling to himself over at Marvel when he's hearing some of this stuff, and he's almost kind of like baiting them with some of the things he's putting on the covers of the comics to try and trick DC into imitating something that is just completely spurious. So so it's there's so much to explore in this in terms of the creative side, but also the business side. And that's something, when I'm working on the Crisis Companion, I'm really trying to really look at three main areas in terms of what's driving this project creatively, what's driving it commercially, and then you have the rise of fandom. A fandom, really finding its voice, really probably in the early 1960s, but really gaining momentum going into the 80s. And so there's a huge amount of pressure on creators. And Wolfman often said in the past that the reason for Crisis is that the DCU is just too confusing for readers. But my take is that, and I'm a writer, and I often think about how onerous it would be to write a Batman story today because of the amount of lore that you have to master if you're going to write within continuity. And so I think that was probably maybe a bigger impetus for Marv, because he kind of got that little bit of a uprating from Gary Thompson in the Green Lantern issue. It wasn't about the universe being confusing. It was about Marv making a mistake in terms of these characters had met before, but you're acting as if they hadn't met before. And maybe that was because this and this, and boy, how are you going to find your way out of this conundrum? And so I think that it's more of an annoyance for people like Marv than a problem for fans to keep track of things.
You're mentioning Paul Levitz and some of the advice that you got from him about the historian aspect of writing a book like this. And it kind of leads into my next thought process in this. The book's described as being both for casual fans and like full-fledged crisisologists. How do you juggle that balance? Because you were kind enough to send us the first few pages of the book, so we got a chance to read over some of that. And I just love how this book has so much depth in it, but at the same time, it's conversational. It feels like, it's approachable. This is the kind of book when I first got into fandom that I would have eaten up. I eat it up now as a fan who fandom is like, this is my escape from everything else going on in life. How do you juggle that balance as you're writing it to make sure that you're appealing to a larger audience base? That's got to be a struggle, and you've done a great job with it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's, I'm very similar to you. This is the kind of book that I wanted to write, the kind of book that I would want to read and that I would devour as well. Cause I love, making of stories, right? I want to know how the sausage was made, because the process to me is as interesting as the product. And so I really tried to write this as a fan, and research it like a historian, but write it, or kind of tell it like a storyteller. So, that's something Paul kind of scolded me on, because I was asking him, I think I was getting into the multiversity in our interview toward the end. He started to scold me saying, you do remember who's publishing this? And I think he felt I was getting a little bit too academic. And that's definitely my bent, is to be more philosophical and be more academic. And I really get into some of that deep stuff in DC. Like I was asking Paul at one point in the writing process, like, how would you differentiate between a different dimension and a parallel world? Because it seems like a dimension and a parallel world, there's kind of like every writer seems to be working with a different definition. Some people think those are the same thing. Other people would see them as distinct. And then I was working out the distinction between science and magic in the DCU. Like, for instance, why does magic affect Superman? Like, what's different? Ultimately, what is different about magic and science? And I talk about how I think it's that quote by Isaac Asimov that any reasonably sophisticated technology will ultimately appear magical until it's understood. And so, and using the B100D scrolls / computer manuals in the Warlord as an example of how Deimos blurs that line. And so I go deep into that. I also go. I'm a big fan of Mark Grunwald, especially some of his stuff before he started working in comics in his some of his fanzines, and he's really trying to think through the logic and trying to make these story worlds make sense. So I definitely do some of that, but so I'm trying to make it fun for people, something like a Wonder Woman's Lasso, bringing in things that people may not have thought about. But I also want to go deep for people who just want to get at what's actually going on. And part of my take on the book is also maybe a postmodern take where I want to look at the text, but I also really want to look at the subtext, like what's really driving the creators. Why, for instance, in the mid 1980s, is this apocalyptic, really apocalyptic storytelling? Why is that resonating for Wolfman? Why does he determine that's the best way to reset the DCU? But also, why does that really resonate with readers? Why do we want to read stories about the end of the world? Like, that's one of the most popular forms of storytelling going back to the beginning of humankind. And so Crisis it kind of steps into this tradition, really going back to things like, the Epic of Gilgamesh, from ancient Babylon. So I get into that as well, and so I try and have something for everyone, for people who just want to kind of look at some of the more trivia surface issues, but then and getting into the more interesting philosophical things. And really, as a writer, I always say the first audience for your book is yourself, and every writing project is kind of a voyage of self-discovery. Because part of me is like, I'm 55 years old. Why am I still fascinated with something I read when I was 14? What's the matter with me? Why can't I just grow up? And so it's almost like you're writing in self-defense. I want to justify this fascination and the defense of the medium, because I think, one of the things I don't have a lot of people in my life care about comics. But as I remember Guillermo del Toro arguing, I don't know if it was at the Academy Awards or prior to the Academy Awards, saying, why is there a separate category for animation? Animation is just a medium. And, animated film should be considered for Best Picture, because it's almost like devaluing them because they're animated. And I think comics is the same. Comics are a medium that can be used to tell any kind of story. Like I'm reading Ronin right now, Frank Miller's Ronin. And man, that's like, I was just showing it. I keep showing panels to my wife when I'm in bed saying, just look at this. I mean, this is just amazing. Like, how did this come out in 1983? I mean, this could have come out yesterday. I mean, it's just brilliant, and sorry, that's a very long answer to your question.
No, it's a good answer. It's funny you're mentioning 55 and why is something that was when you were 14. I'm 55, and I have the equal fascination to it, which is I think that stories that really resonate, I think as you get older, you experience them differently. If that makes sense, because life experience has changed, and it's fun to go back to. We've done a lot of revisiting. We're doing Legends right now. We're doing kind of a full-blown kind of just exploration of it again now, after years of not having read it. And it's interesting to go back to a story that you experienced back when it kicked off and really take a look at it now, and what books matter to you now, which ones don't, what parts of the story, click with you now, and which ones don't. It's very different to journey with it that way. The book is broken down. It's got a full color gallery and a detailed issue by issue commentary. Can you tell us a little bit more what readers we're going to find in the sections with the issue by issue commentary? What kind of things should they be expecting there?
Yeah, well, again, that's where I'm kind of trying to balance between casual readers and crisisologists. And I didn't come up with the term crisisologist. I've heard that most from Adam Murdo. I don't know if he invented it. I think somebody else did. But it's people who are way more obsessed with crisis than they should be. That's the way I would describe it. For some reason, it's become a lifelong obsession. So I'm trying to write for people like that, but also for casual fans, and really provide you with sort of a flashlight and a map, because crisis is dense. I know I listen to so many different podcasts of people talking about it. I remember listening to one. I was kind of almost offended by these Gen Zs kicking on crisis, because they just didn't have the patience for it. It just way too much writing on the pages, and there's a lot going on in there, and there's so many different references and that sort of thing. So I wanted to try and provide a little bit of a map to issue by issue. I go, deep into the cover of each issue and then the story, and trying to do some story analysis, some critiquing as well, because there's a lot of things in Crisis that don't make sense. And, and there's always a question that you as a fan, you don't want to push too hard or think too hard about certain things, because then the whole thing falls apart. Like one of the things I kind of talk about is just this multi-temporal attack by the Anti-Monitor. Like, how does that, if you really start to think about how that that works logically. It doesn't make any sense at all in terms of how the story plays out, or even in terms of what his strategy is or how the Monitor tries to mitigate against it. So I try and go into that and try and make sense of that. But there's other things like, there's a confrontation between Batman and the Joker that takes place, I believe it's in issue 2, where it just seems like a pretty random moment where, the Joker's killed this guy and he's stolen the copyright to these silent films, these black and white films, and they're going to be valuable because they're going to be colorized, and he plans to make some money off that. And of course, Batman breaks through the window and shuts that down. And but then something weird happens in that confrontation. There's an image of Barry Allen, the Flash, appears, and it just disrupts what would be a normal interaction between these two. And what I discovered in that scene in terms of what Wolfman buried in that scene just kind of blew my mind. It was one of those moments where my office is located in the loft above our house. I would kind of, run downstairs and talk to my wife about what I'm finding, and then run back upstairs and work on it, because it was a point in my process where I thought, man, am I developing a case of schizophrenia here? Because I feel like I'm like the guy in the dark basement room putting strings of yarn in between photographs on a wall, because I'm seeing all these connections that I never even considered before, ever heard about before. So I kind of go in deep on those types of things and also make connections to all kinds of different things. So yeah, it's and I do the same thing for the crossovers as well. So I go, Crisis is broken down into 3 main acts. So I, act 1, and then I have an interlude where I go into all the different crossovers, the bannered and the unbannered ones. And then we move on to the next movement in Crisis. And so that's kind of how I move through it.
One of the things that fascinates me on the creation process, because I know how my brain works, and I get stuck on the planning phase of anything I'm doing. Doesn't matter if it's simply doing the dishes. I get so focused on, okay, I got to do this, and I don't actually do the action. Mm-hmm. So, with the extensive research you were doing in this and the stuff you're talking about, I'm deeply impressed that you're able to move on from I've got enough info, time to start writing. When was that? Was there like an aha moment for you, or was that just something as you're going, you're building and you're researching and writing, and how'd that flow for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's something, whenever I'm working on a creative project, I face that same issue, is like, when am I finally ready to write? And, I signed a deal with TwoMorrows, I think it was like March 19th in 2024. And I was, immediately off to the races. And it was by around mid-June that I hadn't written anything yet. I'd just been researching. By around mid-June, I thought, I've just got to start writing, because there's so many thoughts swirling in my mind, and I'm making notes everywhere, but I have to start, coalescing this into something. So I think I wrote the preface or the introduction first. I'm not sure which, but I really was trying to figure out what is going to be the thing that defines the book. And what I ended up hitting on was Dick Giordano's Meanwhile column, where he first introduces Crisis and Who's Who. And so he talks about these things of permanence, change, and viability. Those are the really key terms that he highlights in that. And so I thought, yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about some themes that can really define the book, and what is the interconnection between change, permanence, and viability, and how does Crisis feed into that? So I kind of wrote an essay about that. It changed many times, but it really helped ground the book. And then to figure out the structure, like the way the book was initially structured, which got kiboshed as soon as I turned in my first draft to John Morrow, was I actually moved through every parallel Earth story, going year by year, from, I kind of do a pre-1961, and then I go 1961 all the way up to 1984. And let me tell you, that is laborious, but I didn't want to leave any stone unturned. I kind of wanted readers to have the experience that I had going through this material, but it just took too long to get to Crisis was the problem. And so, we cut probably cut about 40% of the manuscript, which was a little bit painful, but I've been through this enough times to know that editing always makes things better. But yeah, just to answer your question, it's almost like you just subconsciously feel this weight that you just have to download because you've been, inputting all this information. Eventually it has to come out somehow. Cause the first person you're telling the story to is yourself, and you got to get it out on the page to see what's there and what do I even think? Cause I almost think you don't really know what you think about something until you try to put it down in words. And that's where I find writing so satisfying, because you make discoveries on the page as a writer, because sometimes you don't even know you had that thought until you had to articulate it.
You've mentioned before in this conversation about doing documentaries, and I don't want to gloss over this because I think it's an important distinction about the spread of work that you've done. Doing documentaries, writing books. What challenges are there as a creator to flip the switch between preparing for one and the other? Because obviously you talk about different mediums. Those are very different mediums. It's writing, mm-hmm. and obviously you've got to be thinking of what your end product is going to be and how you're conversing with the audience. What are some mm-hmm. of the challenges between that, flipping that switch between the two, and not writing for the visual medium, conversational medium versus for a book?
Yeah, well, the research process is probably pretty similar in terms of, I feel a lot of pressure to become an expert on the subject matter, because especially when I'm going to go start to interview people who are experts on the subject matter, mm-hmm. you want to make sure that they feel respected, that they feel like, I'm just not swooping in to, do a drive-by and try and leech off their success, but that I'm a real serious student of their work and the medium. And so, and also just for my own level of satisfaction, I want to just feel that, I'm going to deliver a product to the readers or to the viewers that is going to be really helpful to them. And also there's a little bit of a fear factor, especially writing for comic book fans who tend to be kind of OCD, obsessive about details and very unforgiving of people who mess those up. So there's you want to also make them feel satisfied that, yes, this person is qualified to know what they're talking about. So the research process is quite similar. When it comes to the writing process, book, it's all on you. I do include a lot of, things from the interviews that I did, but really the material is going to be generated by me. Whereas with a documentary, what I'm thinking about is, the first thing I'm going to try and line up are who are my kind of core interviews, who are going to be the leading lights around this subject matter. Oftentimes I've done films that are about something that's controversial. So who's on this side, who's on that side, who's kind of in the middle. And you're trying to get a diversity of viewpoints. And then I'm trying to think about sequences that are going to help illustrate these ideas. So I made a movie called Hellbound, which is about hell. And different kind of theological takes on hell. And so how do you kind of bring this idea of hell to life visually? So I thought of going to a hell house, a place that tries to scare kids into becoming Christians. I went to a death metal festival and all that sort of thing. And I framed the whole film around the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, because I felt that, hell, it talks about there's this sense of moral certainty that we have, that there's good people and there's evil people in the world, and we just have this desire for justice. And so if there's any event that was really defining for my generation, it was the 9/11 attacks, and we all feel pretty morally certain about who the good guys and the bad guys are in that event. But the more you kind of look into something like that, you realize, well, it's a lot more complicated, and life is a lot more complicated. And so how do you illustrate that? So that's kind of the difference between writing a book and writing a film, a documentary film.
The book is available both physically and digitally. TwoMorrows.com is the website. We will have links for anybody driving. Listen to this. We're going to have links in the show notes and on the website, so that way you can just click and go and pre-order the book now. I've already done that for myself. This book was right up my alley. Is there anything about the book that we haven't mentioned? Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to say too much. I want to make sure that we give people an overview of kind of what the material is that's contained within and why they should be excited about it. Anything that we've missed about this book? Because we've got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing I would say is that, a question that I pose in the introduction to the book is, why is Crisis still relevant today? And I think it is very relevant. And you see even DC is bringing out, the absolute version, and the DC Finest is releasing all the crossovers and that sort of thing. But I think that, Crisis is so pivotal because it really changed the scale of what superhero comics could do. And, where as opposed to just a hero defeating a villain, it's really about, can the whole multiverse, can the universe survive? And it really takes something like continuity and makes it the subject matter in the same way somebody like Grant Morrison takes the form of comics and makes that the subject matter. So it's really comics kind of turning in on itself and doing, Crisis really begins this process of self-examination that other people really ran with over the next few decades. So I think that, and it's not just something that's restricted to comics. I think that this whole idea of a multiverse, of continuity, just all these different things that, and just this whole deep desire to have our fictional worlds make sense. That's something that's just everywhere now. And so I think Crisis, we can really trace the roots of a lot of this back to Crisis that eventually kind of spread to other places in pop culture. So even if you're not a crisisologist like me, I think that you will find this book interesting just because I think it helps you understand not just the series itself, but really some of the main trends that are defining comic book storytelling and cinematic storytelling, even right into the present.
Events also bring us all together. You can be a fan of a universe, and I try to read as much of it if I can, if not all of it, just because I like to get into every little nook and cranny and corner. I can't pretend I've read everything that I want to read. I wish I had. The time is usually the economics there more than even money at this point in time. But one of the nice parts is, let's get very rudimentary. I'm a Superman fan. Jim's a Batman fan. The fact that we're both reading Crisis on Infinite Earths, that brings us together because that storyline incorporates our currently favored characters, but also brings us together and getting to understand the larger universe. This was something at the time that was revolutionary. We are so used to events being this exclamation point, like every couple years, if not every year, we're going to have some sort of big event that's universe spanning. That was not a thing. And when we talk about some of the high points and even some of the confusing low points of Crisis, they were doing something so ambitious because it did not exist before then in this capacity. And that part is looking back at where this all came from and seeing that some of the best of what we see out of events today came out of this first attempt to do something of this scale. Because it isn't just in a universe spanning event. It's easy to leave it at that. It goes through. It's a history spanning event for DC to the point of what you were bringing in as far as where this all came from. And I love the fact that we're still able to have this conversation and explore it from a new lens, especially with what we know today with current reading. There's a reason why this stuff, when they reboot and put it out of continuity, it comes back.
Well, yeah, I think Crisis was supposed to kind of end DC's continuity crisis, but instead it kind of made Crisis the permanent state of comic book storytelling. I kind of joke that, the slogan for DC Comics was worlds will live, worlds will die, and the universe will never be the same again. I would say, rephrase that slightly to say worlds will live, worlds will die, and DC's business model will never be the same again because it's just, it does create this expectation in fans for event-driven storytelling. Like we constantly want to go back and try and redefine the world, redefine these characters in our image because, comics as a medium, how many other storytelling mediums have been around for as long as comic books have? And really every generation needs to kind of reframe these archetypes to fit the modern context. And that's, that's what's happening in the Silver Age with Flash of Two Worlds, and that's kind of what's happening with Crisis, and then that's, that has happened with various events since. I think some of these events are more commercial driven than they are really driven by a necessity for actually rebooting the universe, and some of them are just fun, creative experiments. And I think there's room for everything, and that's just as maybe a wrap up on this is that, something I talk about too is that there's really two impulses, I think, within DC and probably within every fan is just this desire for continuity, for there to be a lineage that makes sense and to know that this aspect of history matters. But there's also a desire for freedom to say, well, this doesn't quite fit into that box, but there's a possibility here I want to explore. And I think Crisis is the best of those because Crisis, it's like a way of trying to simplify the DC universe by telling the most complicated story imaginable. So it kind of fuses those two impulses. It's a huge creative swing. that is trying to create, really narrow the lanes in which storytelling can happen. So I think that's a kind of almost a fascinating paradox right in the midst of the series itself.
So I want to remember one more time, TwoMorrows.com. And it is the Crisis Companion from Flash of Two Worlds to Infinite Crisis and Beyond. Again, it's a 256-page softcover. And this is by Kevin Miller. You can find all the details on TwoMorrows Publishing. I will have links in our show notes and on our website. I do want to take a little sidebar before we get into, I want to talk heavily about the Comic Locker, but before we do that, I'd like to talk to a little bit about you as an author.
Sure.
I always find that these conversations, everything's a jump-on point, right? And we got a great opportunity to just from this get to learn a little bit more about you as an author, as a documentarian, and at everything that you've done. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and where we can learn about your books and your work? So that way, I love when I have these conversations because it's a chance to get to follow you, and I feel it's that same way for our listeners.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I've been a writer in some capacity for about 30 years. I started in newspapers. Well, actually, I started self-publishing a book. I was a tree planter, which is somebody who goes up and plants trees in areas that were logged for forestry. One of the worst jobs you can have, but also can be quite lucrative. And so I actually wrote a book called The Tree Planter Survival Guide, basically a guide to surviving your first season. I self-published that, distributed across Canada where I live. And that was kind of my first way in. And then I got into newspapers and then moved into book publishing and film. I worked several years as a screenwriter, eventually became a director, producer, editor. Because, anything I do, I like to know how it all works. And so I've kind of experienced all kinds of different things. Around 2016, I started to move back more into publishing. So I've got a few different series that I've written. I do a lot of writing for middle grade readers, a lot of fiction series. I am moving into, I've done some young adult books as well. And I think I'm finally old enough to start writing for adults. So I actually have an adult series I'm working on as well.
Oh, cool.
You can check out my stuff. My website is kevinmillerxi.com. I'm Kevin Miller XI because I was the 11th Kevin Miller on the Internet Movie Database. So I thought I would just
That's cool.
embrace that. There's now dozens of us. I always kind of joke that it'd be fun to make a movie where the credit for every position on the film is Kevin Miller, but it's a different Kevin Miller from the Internet Movie Database. If I could just somehow corral them all, because I'm sure we've got Kevin Millers from every department, and we could probably cast, every actor's Kevin Miller as well. But anyway, maybe one day. But yeah, that's so I've dabbled in all kinds of different mediums, I've founded publishing companies. I actually even have done a comic book. I did 3 issues. I just couldn't afford to go beyond it, but it was a comic book called Meth the Immortal. It's about a pig named Methuselah who when Adam and Eve are getting the boot from the Garden of Eden, in the stampede of everyone leaving, this fruit falls from the tree of life, and Methuselah eats it. And he gains immortality, but he also gains a whole lot more. So it was kind of I would say it's like a pig version of Hellboy was kind of how I was envisioning it, getting him into all kinds of supernatural battles. But anyway, that was a fun process as well. And you learn different things in different mediums. I find that my most natural lane is to write novels. I feel that is where I feel it's my natural environment as a writer. I have worked on a lot of films and writing comics, but I find that format isn't as conducive to me as working in straight fiction, just because you have to be so aware of panel by panel storytelling, page by page, and so the way I would approach it is I would want every page to end in a cliffhanger and every 2-page spread end in a cliffhanger. And so you're trying to pace your story to try and pull readers through. And so it was fun. And I had a really good artist that I was collaborating with, but it's laborious. Let me tell you, to write an issue, it was painful.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Meth. I was going to talk to you about Meth because I read it. I read the first issue. I haven't read any of the other issues, and I loved it. I loved his origin and how he became immortal. And I was just like, I didn't have time to get through all the issues. So I was like, I just got one done. I'm like, oh, I'm reading 2 and 3. You had 100% locked in on that after the first issue. That was a really cool, real cool story. And I highly recommend that one to anybody because it's a well-crafted story. But his backstory was really kind of cool. I've never even remotely thought of something like that. That was a neat little twist on Garden of Eden stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It was fun to work on. It was just kind of a random idea I had one day. And, I actually, talking about doing everything, I lettered that comic. I didn't do the art, but I did everything else. And, yeah, it could be re-lettered. That's for sure. But, yeah.
Again, I thought it looked good. So I'm going to give you props on lettering as well, my friend.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you also have that Up the Creek series, the Milligan Creek series, and I haven't had a chance to read that yet, but I saw it. And the backstory, you actually did something like that with your friends? You actually did a creek run?
Yeah, well, where I grew up in a place called Foam Lake, Saskatchewan, and running through Foam Lake is something called Milligan Creek, named after the founders of the town. And most of the year, it's just this, quiet little meandering creek. But in the spring, if you get a lot of snow and it melts quickly, that creek becomes like a roaring river. And imagine now a creek is very slow and curving, right? So imagine a huge volume of water moving through there. And if you generally, when that happens, you have about maybe 48 hours when you can canoe this thing. And so one year we decided to try it. And now we didn't do what you should do when you're going to go on some fast moving narrow waterway, is you should probably scout it to make sure there's no things like barbed wire fences stretched across, or dead trees, or beaver dams, or other things that you're going to encounter. So we did that and just had this death-defying trip right in the middle of town. And that kind of, I used that as an inspiration, plus another ill-fated canoe trip I took with my wife that found us stranded in the middle of a floodplain with no way to find our way home. And that was the first adventure. But the Milligan Creek series is very much sort of a perfected, exaggerated world growing up, where it's about a bunch of kids in a small town in the prairies who, embark on ways to entertain themselves, which often winds up getting them into all kinds of trouble. And but it's really kind of well-meaning fun, and so yeah, I have a lot of fun writing stuff like that. I tend to be kind of a serious person in real life, but when I get on the page, I love somehow the humor side of me gets out. So I just really love writing for a young audience, because you can just make people ridiculous and exaggerated. And to me, the more exaggerated and ridiculous, the better. So, yeah.
Well, it is very like my brother and I, when we were kids, we had a Euclid Creek, which feeds into the Black River, which feeds into Cuyahoga River, which then feeds into Lake Erie. And we always talk how cool it would be to start in Euclid Creek and go to the thing. And we never did it because, we're like, no, mom and dad were like, no, but two, it was one of those things where we always dreamed of doing. So when I saw that, not only you had the comic, but you actually did it, I was like, oh, this guy is awesome. I love this guy.
Yeah, no, one of my best friends growing up, him and I, we got into all kinds of adventures. When you grow up on a farm in Saskatchewan in the 1980s, you don't have a lot to, entertain you. And so you have to create your own adventures. And that's really the spirit of the series, is kids who are using their imagination, and they often embark on these things that they tend to get out of hand, and so now they have to try to contain it. So that's the fun of it, is coming up with the next big thing that's going to explode under them.
How do you figure out what the next big thing is? I'm curious.
Well, that's I teach a lot of writing as well, and something I'm always hammering my students on is your premise. Really, what is the what if question that gives rise to the story? Because that's the most important thing. If you haven't asked a good question, the rest of the story doesn't really matter. So it's really, when I'm thinking about the Milligan Creek series, I'm trying to think of what is the next big thing they could pull, or really anything I'm working on. So Meth the Immortal, what if so Adam and Eve couldn't eat from the tree of life, but what if some other animal did? What would that mean? What would happen? How would that affect the history of the world? And so, it's really that jumping off point is asking that interesting what if question, because, that's really where every story is going to begin, is some writer looking at the world the way it is and saying, well, what if it was somehow different? And then that just becomes the launching point. I'm working on a novel right now called Teeth, and it's the third. So I have a series for young adults. Each one is based around a different icon of Halloween. So my first book is called Pumpkins, and the question there is, what if somebody accidentally planted a pumpkin patch over top of an old unmarked graveyard? And what if each one of those pumpkins became possessed by a spirit of somebody who's in that graveyard? And what if you carved that pumpkin, you became possessed by the spirit of the dead? So so that's kind of how the story progresses. And so, I'm working on one about a vampire. And it's about what if these glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth could be used to summon, to reconstitute the last vampire who ever lived, who was exposed to sunlight and disintegrated. But what if these teeth could reintegrate the vampire? And then what would happen? So, that's kind of, for me, that's always where a story begins, is with a question like that I'm really interested in pursuing. I have no idea what the answer is, but that's why I write the book. I want to know the answer.
That's awesome. Do you find, as a writer, as a person who's been editor, producer, and all that kind of stuff, when you're reading a story or when you're watching somebody else's TV show or movie, do you find yourself on the critique side, or do you find yourself, hey, I'm just enjoying the run?
Well, my way of determining if something is good or not is if the editor just is silenced. I watched the movie Obsession a few weeks ago, and I was just blown away. And again, Obsession is such an interesting film because it's not necessarily breaking new ground, but it's taking an old idea and just making it awesome. And so, when I get so emotionally engaged in a story that the critic is turned off, that for me, that's the sign that something's really working. But then I want to go back. Jim, I know I've heard you say many times that you do, I think, 3 readings of a comic.
Yes.
And I think that's just such a good approach, because the first time you're just sort of almost like mapping it out in your mind. The second time you can go back and you can start to analyze, and the third or the fourth or the fifth time, and you're just really trying to get at, why did it work? Sometimes you don't want to know. I play guitar as well, and I love to, I'm a big metal fan, so I'm always looking for really good riffs, and I want to learn how to play a song. But, there's a point at which that song starts to lose its magic because you've just completely deconstructed it. So sometimes it's better just to enjoy something and walk away. Yeah. But I'm always curious. I want to know, why did it work? Why was it so effective? And that goes back to, like, Stephen King was one of my early mentors in writing, not personally, but just from a distance. And I knew something that he did as a kid was he would go and he would copy out passages of fiction that he thought were really good. And because you experience writing much differently when you're doing it than as opposed to just writing it. And now you're going to start to see things that you weren't conscious of earlier, because you're seeing where the punctuation fits in. When are they, creating a paragraph break? Are they using a whole bunch of long sentences, short sentences, and that sort of thing? You're going to experience that differently. The same way, if you cycle along a route that you normally drive, you're going to experience that route a lot differently. You're going to realize, oh, wait a second, there's a hill here. I didn't even realize that. But now that I'm on a bike, I'm seeing it differently. And so I think it can teach you a lot. If you want to learn the craft, I think breaking it down and seeing what people are doing, because, a lot of what makes writing work is patterns and structures. That was really drilled into me as a screenwriter. And so I always want to know, what is the underlying structure and why am I responding to it? And then as a writer, how can I then turn around and use that structure to draw my reader in? Because, a lot of good writing is psychological and emotional manipulation of the reader. And so something as an editor, I often talk to writers about is, your entries, your entrances and your exits are super important. And something that a lot of writers don't think about is the magic of the paragraph break. So using paragraphing to control the pacing and flow of your story, and to constantly be creating that wonder and worry, that mystery and suspense that just keeps luring people to keep going, and always withholding. A lot of writers, they do all this research, and the thing they just can't wait to do is share all this stuff that they've learned. And I'm like, no. We don't want answers. We want questions. And, even when you give us some answers, we want those answers to raise more questions, because, as a reader, we love to solve puzzles. And we want to feel like we're engaging in the process as well. We're not just passive consumers. We're actually trying to solve the mystery alongside the characters and everyone else. So yeah. And so for me, it's a fun part of the writing process, but then to turn around and think about the reader, how can I facilitate that for the reader as well?
Cool.
You mentioned Stephen King being one of your early influences. Do you have a favorite King book? I'm a big Stephen King fan, so I admit I'm geeking out a little bit with you.
Yeah. I love Christine. I think Christine as a book and as a movie were two of my early entrances to Stephen King. Pet Sematary was probably one of the more disturbing ones of his that I've read. I've had different views on The Stand over time. When I first read it, I loved it. Later on, I really kind of struggled with it. I think, and also the first book in the Gunslinger series, I think it's one of the best things I've ever read. I think it's one of the best things Stephen King has ever written. I'm kind of a little bit iffy on some of the subsequent books in that series, but I think The Gunslinger itself is just phenomenal. And that when I was I first tried to start writing a novel when I was about 15, and The Gunslinger was what inspired me to actually go. And I probably wrote, 6 or 7 chapters of me trying to rewrite The Gunslinger. And, but that's really, I think that when it comes to being a writer or any creative person, really, you kind of go through 2 phases. The first one is imitation of the things that you love. And I think that's a really important phase. And people are almost kind of ashamed of that phase. But I think that's one of the most important phases, because that's how you learn the craft. That's how you learn the structures, by imitating the things you love. But then the second phase, it's also a form of imitation, but what you're imitating is the quest for a unique voice. And so you're kind of imitating that distinctive approach that your mentors all took, but you're taking it in a different direction. So you're now kind of, everything's gone into the blender and has been reconstituted, and now you're outputting something that is utterly unique to you, in the same way, what Stephen King wrote was utterly unique to him. And so I think it's really, you should be, like Bono says, I think it's amateurs borrow, experts steal. And I think that it's fun to, I think that you shouldn't be ashamed about imitating the things that you love at the beginning, because again, what you're doing at that stage is just internalizing the structures that eventually you're going to find a unique way of expressing.
King is an interesting author to bring up right now, just because of the fact that he has his own little universe/multiverse that's in there, especially when you start talking about Gunslinger and how it relates to the world. I agree with you so much on the first book, because it's an example, I think, of what happens with the great comic, right? You start becoming a fan of the characters, and they get you through. You're right, some of the books were a little bit of a roller coaster ride, the later ones coming along, but the first one was so good that you fall in love with Roland, you fall in love with the characters and the universe. And I remember he was having health issues during the subsequent books, and it became like, is he going to finish this at certain points in times? And I remember the panic of saying, I want to see the end of this story, which I think is a testament to when somebody, and I feel like we do that as comic fans all the time, right? You get through some of the filler issues, you get through sometimes where an author's taken over and they take a character in a direction that isn't as exciting for you as the previous one, but it is those initial lock-on points where you start loving character and wanting to follow their continuing adventures. I think he did that with the first Gunslinger book, created that same level of passion. The comics were outstanding too for anybody listening to this. I know I'm going on a very big sidebar, but it all does come back.
I have not read the comics, but I should take a look at them. I've seen them actually in the library here. But the interesting thing about the Gunslinger, I have a version of it that's illustrated. It's full of typos, and I almost get the sense that he just I don't think he had any idea where that was going to go for him in terms of a series. And so I feel like that's part of what makes it so good, is that he just kind of he just downloaded it and just probably wrote it very quickly. And it has that feel to it. But I think that's what makes it so exciting, is that it wasn't this, kind of left brain strategic, Brandon Sanderson, I've got all, 12 installments figured out ahead of time. It was just more, I'm just going to run with this idea. Really the first line of the book is so great, and just I want to know about this character, Roland, and where is this going to go? So I think that's probably what's driving that book.
Some of his afterwords and some of the other books allude to exactly what you're saying. The fact that, the story's kind of heading in directions that he didn't expect, and all of that. And it does feel like a journey from that respect, which is kind of cool. And it does lead back to, I think, what we love so much in comics. I love all storytelling medium. I agree with you on that. There's advantages to different mediums as far as in the types of stories you can get. Story tends to drive. I'm a gamer too, but I tend to be driven much more to story-based games. I love role-playing games. I love even single-player, just contained episodic games and stuff like that, where story is the driving force behind it. It usually drives me through. The game mechanics wind up being very secondary to me if you've got an amazing story that I feel like I'm interacting with. Right. Much like choose your own adventure books and stuff like that along the way, which I've never grown out of.
Oh, I know. I Returned to Brookmere. I remember reading it was a D&D book. I read that thing about 1,000 times. Well, and I think as a writer too, a story's working is when it gets out of your control, because,
Yes.
you're always going to start a story with a fairly well thought out outline. But, I always say my characters have way better ideas than I do. And once they, there's always a stage in a process where you no longer feel you're creating, you're just almost like kind of transcribing what's going on with your characters. And that's, to me, when it's working. And that's why, as much as I enjoyed working in film, I found that process really difficult, because what often is required, especially when writing a feature film, is they want a treatment beforehand, which is a very detailed summary of the story. You get approval on the treatment, then you go off and write the script. But I always found that when I went to write the script, it never resembled the treatment, because once you're writing the script, the characters really come alive, and they just have better ideas than you had beforehand. But that doesn't really work too well when somebody's paying you to write something and you turn in something that has no resemblance to the thing that you pitched them on. That doesn't go over too well. And so I found it kind of hard to fit myself into that process where, there's some people who can just do that over and over and over again, but that's not me.
Have you had a particular character or story that you've written that where you thought it was going in one direction and the characters surprised you, or the concept surprised you, or it took you where you didn't expect?
Almost every story, and yet some, and there's other things too. Like, so I have this book called Brooms, which I kind of set out a challenge to myself to tell a story about the sport of curling, witches, and lake monsters. And I was going to set it in northern Saskatchewan. And so I wanted to see if my brain could somehow connect those things. And I just knew that I wanted to have this scene right near the end where this lake monster rises, it breaks through the ice on this frozen lake and rises up above my protagonist, and I didn't know how I was going to get there. I just knew that somehow that had to be kind of one of the defining moments in the story. So really the surprise was eventually how that ended up happening, and why that became necessary to the story. Sometimes you get those images for the end of your story and you realize it's sabotaging the story. I wrote a short film like that where I had this visual I wanted to end the film on, and I realized that was ruining the script, and I had to just let that go. But other times you can have something like that, and it has to happen. You just have no idea how or why. And so it's exciting to see how your brain eventually solves that. I think you do most of your best creative work when you're not thinking consciously, that your brain it's processing in the background. And so I'm always excited to see, because again, writing is what makes writing fun is that you're discovering as you go. And so I think it also makes it more fun for the reader, because if a writer doesn't know necessarily how you're going to connect points A to H, you can't accidentally telegraph that to the reader, because you're kind of discovering it as you go. And yet, every story seems to reach this point where you reach an ending that feels inevitable but not predictable. I think that's what that's always the sweet spot, I think, for storytelling.
So that's Kevin Miller. That'll be in the show notes as well. Please check out Kevin's work. And the last piece I want to make sure we talk about today is the Comic Locker, which I have been using for years, a competing product. Something I jumped onto, and I've been, scanning my comics in and stuff like that. You mentioned this in our initial email conversation, and it was honestly my first exposure to it. And I started dabbling in it and taking a look through it. And the beauty is, and I'm going to jump back in a second, because let's tell to our listeners what they are. The beauty is, for our listeners, this is a product where you can take your current database and import it, which for me, that ease of being able to move everything over to it. I'm heading to Heroes Con next weekend, and one of the things I'm looking to do is get this set up for myself and be able to use this at Heroes Con.
Awesome.
And genuinely excited for that. And really why I'm bringing it up is because this was like a revelation. So can we tell everyone what the Comic Locker is? Because I've had some time to play with it. So I'm being very general right now, but let's start with that. What is the Comic Locker?
Well, the Comic Locker it's an app and it's a website that basically helps you. I put it this way: and again, for some people this is a dirty word or a dirty initials, is AI. It's AI powered in terms of it's really an app that it goes back to really early February. So I was on a road trip doing writing workshops, and so I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts, and I kind of became what is known as AI pilled in terms of some really exciting things were happening with AI back in early February. You have the, OpenClaw becomes kind of a big deal. You have the release of the new Claude Code and Claude Cowork and Codex, basically all in the same week. And these tools, I'm fairly tech conscious, and I had been using, different LLMs, especially for research. I found super helpful, but I never really thought of them as a creative partner in terms of helping me do something else. And so, dabbled a little bit in these things, and I realized, wait a second, like, these models have become, they're not just a research tool anymore. They can become a building tool. And so I've been doing a lot of research for the Crisis Companion. I was doing writing workshops in Edmonton, speaking of which if you're ever in Alberta, Canada, and you're a comic book fan, go to Edmonton. It's got some of the best comic shops in the country. And so I was teaching for a week, and every day I would go to a different comic shop. And, just thinking about, AI's reached a point where it can allow somebody who's a non-coder like me to build something. Well, what's something I would love to build? I would like to build the ultimate app for a comic collector that can take some of these opportunities presented by AI, not just to build the app, but also to make it an app that can learn from you, the collector. So it can look at your collection, and it can help you identify opportunities for collecting if you're somebody who collects just for interest, or if you're somebody who collects for value. But also then we have a whole bunch of features in it where it will look at your collection and recommend all kinds of content to you. So podcasts, articles, YouTube videos that constantly updates. It'll look into back catalogs for different shows. It'll look, at current things. We have all kinds of features for if you're at a convention. I actually have something called convention mode, where you can set a budget for yourself for the convention. You can say, there's a button you can press that says, I'm here, and it will then send a notice out to everybody else who's on the app to let them know that you're at the convention. So it presents an opportunity to meet up with other people. Maybe if you want to, buy, sell, trade at the convention, you can, we've got a scanner in there that allows you to scan comics. So say you're looking at something you don't know, well, what is the condition of this comic? Well, you can actually do an AI grade right on the spot that can give you an approximation of what the grade of the comic is, just through a few photographs. And so I really tried to make it an all-in-one app that just does everything. We have a marketplace on there as well. So the marketplace, we don't actually facilitate transactions on the site, but what you can do is if you add your collection to the site, if you have anything you want to make for sale, you can click that and what the price is you want to sell it at. And anybody who has that comic on their wish list will get pinged to let them know that an issue of that comic's available. Or alternatively, if you have something on your wish list, you can, anything you add to your wish list, you'll get pinged by somebody who has that for sale, and it kind of favors people geographically as well. So you'll get pinged by people who are close to you in case you want to be able to do the transaction face to face, or you can do it long distance. But I just wanted to make it a place where really you can connect with people, you can grade, you can trade, and you can kind of keep track of your collection. And the other thing, you mentioned about the onboarding, that's the other thing I wanted to do as well, is make it frictionless for people. So I know a lot of people are committed to things like, League of Comic Geeks or CLZ or some of these other platforms, which are great. But if they wanted to migrate, I wanted to make that process seamless for them as well. And so, it's, and again, I want to say I am not I didn't even know what a Git repo was in, early February. I didn't even know, I didn't know the first thing about coding. I've gone through a very steep learning curve over the last 4 months. I've, devoted a huge amount of time to this. And, even though AI was used to build the site, really what AI becomes is your hands and feet, and a sounding board for good ideas. It's been a hugely fun process. It also, can be a very aggravating process because the fun part is building it. The laborious part is realizing all the bugs that are existing in the site, and then, one by one working through how to fix those, and also to optimize, different features like, say, the grading feature, or, you can do a value lookup. And so in terms of making that value be as realistic as possible, not only where do you draw the data from, how do you parse that data in a way that's actually usable? And so there's been a lot of work put into that. And even just how your collection is worked out, because again, where you're drawing data from. Aquaman is really problematic, for instance, because there's been so many different series. So if you're adding that to your collection, make sure that's sorted properly. So yeah, you realize that just creating an app is one thing, and then it becomes an ongoing process of perfecting and improving. And that's kind of the phase I'm in right now with the Comic Locker.
Question now. I personally do not have any type of database. Sean has his organized database, and I keep thinking about how, one day I got to get my comics organized, and then I'm going to start getting a database. So being a person who's on the ground floor, how do I enter the comics into the database? Is it a keying? Is it a scanner? What kind of stuff do we go with?
Yeah, we have a few different options. So if you wanted to enter them all in a spreadsheet and then import the spreadsheet, you could actually import them directly. If you want to just do a search on the site, you can just, if you have them, you can just scan the cover and enter it that way. And that's the cool thing about that with the scanning is, so we're linked up to a database that will provide, stock covers for every issue. But if you actually scan your own cover, then it will replace the stock image with the cover that you scan. So then you can actually see your comics. And then that's helpful when you're going to buy and sell as well, because somebody who's looking at your comic can actually see the condition for themselves. And so then there's a true representation of what's in your collection. So it, again, trying to make it as frictionless as possible, but there is that painful starting point. If you've never entered your comics into a database, there's no way around it. It's going to be somewhat labor intensive for you, but so whatever method works best for you.
Well, the ease of it is that you can use any device, which is terrific. I mean, that's when we talk about labor intensive, being able to have your ability to scan on whatever you happen to have in front of you. I know when I've over the years scanned my collection, and it's the hardest part was that first step. And it used to be a lot harder to do this, knowing that today through this platform, I can do it on my phone. I can do it on a tablet. I can do it on my computer, whatever is your preferred method, or jump between them. Because there are times where I'm sitting in front of my laptop, being able to interact with just that and not have to go grab a different device in order to do that is nice and convenient as well. I know that this has a free version and a paid version. Let's talk about the pro version. What does a listener get? I mean, what does any user get out of the starting gate? And I already know this. What are the advantages of pro?
So what you get out of the starting gate is, and again, I wanted to make onboarding as frictionless as possible, so you can sample all the features for 7 days for free, because I want to allow people to just it's so frustrating. You go onto a site and everything's sectioned off, and you have to pay to even be able to sample it. So I want everyone to get a true sense of the app for 7 days, and then if you pay for the pro version, I tried again, trying to make it cheap. I'm offering it for $5 a month or $40 for the year, kind of hoping people are going to go for $40 for the year, because it just, you don't have to think about it anymore instead of getting pinged with these bills. So you get access to all the features. And for the free version, you can add 50 comics, and then with a pro version, it's unlimited. How many? I think somebody on there has over 30,000. It's unlimited what you can add. And I know I'm never going to get rich off this, but I'm trying to basically cover my costs, because it does cost, to develop this is cost a fair amount of my time and money, but also then there's just some ongoing, cost for hosting and, every time people scan and all that kind of stuff. So just trying to make it reasonable, but also still sustainable. That's kind of been the sweet spot I'm aiming for.
So for our listeners, you did something really cool. We've got a link that's going to be available to them where they get all listeners are going to get $10 off pro. But we also have and I've got a link in the show notes that is going to be, and I'm going to put it on all our socials, so that way our listeners can get on board with this. But we also have a contest that you put together, which I think is really cool, relating to Crisis. And I was looking over, you provided some really cool trivia questions, but you're going to be giving away some pro subscriptions to our listeners. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'd like to give away 3 one-year pro subscriptions. I thought it'd be fun to do a little Crisis trivia contest. And so the first 3 people to answer the questions correctly will get a free subscription. And I'm also offering to any listeners, $10 off an annual subscription. You just have to go to the Comic Locker, and don't forget the word the. It's thecomiclocker.com/Raging Bullets. And if you register through there, it automatically applies a $10 discount off the annual fee, which is basically a 25% discount. And but yeah, other than that, there'll be 3 lucky winners who will get a free 1-year subscription.
All right, so listeners, and these are going to be available again in the show notes, and they will be available on the website, and they'll also be available in our Facebook group, for example. We have 3 questions, and the first person to answer any one of these 3 questions correctly is going to get a 1-year subscription to the Comic Locker. So the first question is, what character introduced in Crisis was originally conceived as a villain, turned into a hero for the series, and then transformed into a villain again in Final Crisis? The second question, what real-world event could have saved Supergirl from dying in the Crisis? And the third question, according to Crisis lore, what artist-writer was offered a chance to work on Crisis but turned it down? Partly because Frank Miller told him he'd be crazy to take it on. And those are the 3 questions. Again, they will be available on our website and in the show notes. If you're driving, we want to make sure this is accessible to everybody. But the prize from this, being the first person to answer them and send them over to ragingbullets@gmail.com, is going to be a 1-year subscription to the Comic Locker. This has been an absolutely great conversation. Kevin, I appreciate you coming on to the show. Is there anything we've forgotten today that you'd like to make sure that we shout out?
No, I think we've covered it. And let me just say, I love your guys' show. The thing I love about you guys is that you've been at this for over 20 years. And you know, the one word that I keep hearing over and over again on your show is the word love. And that you guys do such a great job of just really celebrating the things that you enjoy. And that really, you know, for people like me listening to the show, you know, I was just, before we did this interview, I was out gardening, listening to your take on Legends 4, and just really enjoying what you guys had to say. By the way, I'm a huge Warlord fan, which, you know, Warlord was one of the comics, you know, that really got me into comics. And, you know, partly probably was the way that Mike Grell drew the female characters. But yeah, so I, unlike you guys, I was right in there with Warlord back then, and a huge Conan the Barbarian fan. Conan the Barbarian, the movie, in my top 10 best movies of all time. And yeah, Conan the comic, I really love that sort of thing. So yeah, it's so fun to, you know, be able to revisit some of those series with you guys. So so it's a pleasure just to be part of the process that you guys are going through.
I ordered the Warlord Omnibus just because I love Grell's work. It's just one that I missed due to budget back in the day. I'm so excited to read that because I feel like it's a gap in my DC knowledge. I've read issues of the Warlord, but not, you know, to the same extent as people that have loved it. And every issue that I've read, I'm like, why am I not reading more of this? So that Omnibus, with the fact that it's been remastered, like, gotta be on that. It's so cool.
It's you know, it's one of 2 series that I have almost every Mike Grell issue. I think I'm missing about 4 at this point. That and the New Teen Titans are 2 series that I've gone out of my way to complete. And so that's it's been one of my first loves for sure.
One of the things I encourage everybody to do when they grab this book is to really enjoy reading the preface to the book, because you really go on your love and passion for comics in there. I was connecting with you as I was reading it. You talk about love and passion. This book you definitely want to pick up, and I love that you're one of us. If that makes any sense. I mean, it's great to feel that, and to feel like you're coming at it about, you know, this is my chance to be a fresh voice on this particular topic that we all love, and it just keeps the conversation going. I appreciate you giving us so much time today and giving us a shot to have a conversation about this, because this is exactly the kind of work that I love as a fan. I can't be more excited to pick up this book when it comes out this summer, and just really appreciate you. And for everybody listening to this, please check into our show notes and on our website for details on how to connect with all of Kevin's work and the Comic Locker. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Holy caffeine!
RagingBullets.com is our show website that you can find details on upcoming episodes. We feed into our Twitter/X and also our Facebook fan page. We are proud to have an amazing Facebook group community, and I want to thank everyone that posts there. We post all of our episodes there. They're posting blog posts, links to different media and different websites, everything that's really relevant to comics, pop culture, things that you want to talk about, and their own commentary. That really is their section. I get all my news there first. It's something I check daily just to see what's going on and what people are talking about. And I want to thank everyone who posts there. I really enjoy the commentary. I want to remind everyone to support thecomiclocker.com, the collecting app that you should be checking out right now. Thanks to Kevin Miller for our contest. And also, it's thecomiclocker.com/Raging Bullets to get $10 off a pro subscription for our listeners. And I want to shout out from TwoMorrows.com, the Crisis Companion by Kevin Miller. Links will be in the show notes to both of these. You can get the Crisis Companion either softcover or digital. Pre-order it now from TwoMorrows Publishing. And we are sponsored as always by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. Mr. Seglin, what's going on over at DCBService.com?
Dark Knights of Steel, Volume 2, Issue 1 of 12, 48% off, only $2.59. And the Dark Knight of Steel, Heir to the Sea one-shot, 38% off, only $3.71. Thank you, DCBS.
Over at InStockTrades.com, once again, they are the top sellers are a lot of DC material over there. Just some sampling of them. DC Finest, Dead Man, How Many Times Can a Guy Die? DC Finest, Batman, A Death in the Family trade paperback. DC Finest, Wonder Woman, Dawn Before Darkness trade paperback. These are all $39.99 regularly, 42% off, only $23.19. Zatanna by Paul Dini, Omnibus hardcover, $100 regularly, 40% off, only $60. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Be sure to check out the About Us section of our show website to connect with us on social media and gaming platforms. I'm a regular co-host on Is It Jaws bi-weekly for film reviews with host Paul Spataro and a wonderful array of guests as we review films every other week. Our next episode, Jim and I are going to be back with Legends. We were supposed to be doing that this week. We took a break because we had this wonderful interview opportunity. So we are going to be doing our next discussion, which will be Superman number 3, Adventures of Superman 426, Action Comics 586, Legends number 5, and Cosmic Boy number 4. That will be our penultimate episode with Ken Nabby, and we will see you then.
Bye!
All right, you guys. Are you ready to sing your song?
I'd say we are. Yeah, let's sing it now.
Okay, this should be fun. Now get ready for your cue. Okay, Sean?
Okay.
Okay, Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Raging Bullets time is here. We talk about what we hold dear. Comic books and TV shows. Superheroes and their clothes. Justice League and so much more. I just love Green Lantern Corps. We talk about the books we've read with spoilers straight ahead.
Okay, fellas, get ready. That was very good, Sean.
Naturally.
Jim, you're a little flat there, so be careful. Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Justice League and so much more. I still love Green Lantern Corps. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show.
Excellent job, guys.
Let's sing it again. Yeah, let's sing it again.
No, that's enough. Let's not push it.
Push it. What is that? Yeah, what are you talking about?
No, I didn't mean anything by that.
I think
Sean,
it's right
Jim,
there. Like,
how long do you want the
it's
song to go?
Look, it's our